knickers. Pants, unders, kegs, whatever you want to call them, we all have multiple pairs, I should hope. But it's not something we actually talk about. We don't go into a meeting like this and discuss what underwear we've got on. And I actually believe that stories are like knickers. We all have at least one pair. And we have multiple pairs. And we have different pairs for different occasions. And different pairs for different days. And we have different stories for different days. We have different stories for different people. And we have different stories we tell ourselves. Now, storytelling has been something we have been doing for 40,000 years. It's not something new. It's not a new fashion. It is something that we have fundamentally evolved to do. It connects us from a neuro level. When I tell a story, the same neurons in your mind will fire as are going in my mind. And that creates a neural connection with your audience. The emotions that you feel when you tell a story are the emotions that your audience also feel. Chemicals are released in the brain. Cortisol and dopamine are both released when you hear a story. Now, dopamine is the hit, the high, the one that you're always going for and a lot of people get addicted to dopamine. So you can get addicted to storytelling. You can get addicted to listening to stories. And that's where I am now. I'm pretty much addicted to stories, all about storytelling. And I didn't know about storytelling before 2004. I found storytelling when I was at one of my lowest points. I was in a deep depression. Anxiety had me trapped in my own home. It was like when I stepped forward to go out into my own back garden to hang my washing on my line, there was a wall there. It was an invisible wall, but I could not pass that wall. Now, the reason for the anxiety was somebody had come back from my past suddenly and thrown my world into complete turmoil. And it got to the point where I was paranoid. I thought that any time I left the house, any time I went out, somebody was going to report me back to her. I couldn't pass her house to get to the train station, get to work. I had to be signed off sick. I had to just try and rebuild my life from that point upwards. And I couldn't do it on my own. I had a friend. We all need a friend. We all need a tribe. As we said earlier, tribe is very important. The people that we surround ourselves with make us who we are today. And my friend was not going to let me rot in that house. So she gently encouraged me to go out, one step at a time. We can never reach our goal without taking that first step. And eventually I was out and about. Sometimes I was in tears just doing it. And when I first started to go to this group of wonderful people in a dark, dingy little pub in Birmingham, just down the road actually, I'd sit behind a big friend of mine and sit, and often the tears would cry because my anxiety was so bad I just couldn't actually face anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody. And it took months, took years to get over that. And during this time I saw a performance storyteller. She was actually the storytelling laureate of Birmingham of the UK, and she was amazing. And she held the audience trapped in her words. They sat and they stared at her, and she took them off into a world of make-believe, a world of fiction and fantasy, but she held everybody in the palm of her hand with her actions, her movements, her voice. And I thought, I can do that. I want to do that. That is amazing. But again, it took me 4 months, 5 months before I plucked up the courage to ask her, how do I do that? Can I do that? And the answer was yes. You can do that. And she gave me some hints and some tips and sent me on my way, and I took up some training in storytelling. But it still took ages for me to actually take that first step, that first moment into actually getting up on stage and telling a story. And that was when I realised I could re-own my anxiety. the first time I stepped on a stage in another dingy pub in Birmingham, that way, I felt alive for the first time. For the first time in what I can remember, I felt like I was me again. I stepped there, I stood up, my heart was racing, I felt sick, I wanted to run, I wanted to hide. I looked across the faces of these people that were at this open mic night that were there to see poets and musicians, and I was a storyteller. What were they going to think? What were they going to do? But as I stood there on that stage and started to tell the story, and it was a story I'd written myself, so I knew it well, I told the story and people were enthralled, and they stood there and they watched and they listened and they stopped drinking and they stopped talking and they paid attention. And when I stepped down off that stage, they applauded and then carried on with their conversation, and the next person went up on stage. And I remember nothing else from that evening because I was a nervous wreck. I was shaking all over, I felt sick, but I felt so alive and so vivid and so bigger, much, much bigger than I'd ever felt before in my life. And from that moment on, I was hooked. Storytelling. I started finding different stories from different genres, from different backgrounds, but they all tended to have the same sort of message. They were inspirational. They had strong female characters. And I performed around Birmingham at the BBC Open Space and places like that. And then life took me on a bit of a curveball. It took me down south to live by the sea. And I love it down there. It's amazing. I miss my hometown, but I'd never come back. But storytelling took a bit of a back seat. I forgot I had children. I told them stories. I used storytelling to teach them lessons. If they were having problems within their schooling, I taught them storytelling. I told them stories that would help them get through that, because storytelling is what we used to have as our education system. All the old fairy tales that we hear now and that we tell now are what we were originally teaching our children how to be good citizens, how to act, how to behave, what to expect from life. A lot of them gave hope to people that were in desperate situations. And that's what storytelling should still be. But it's changed. When we put it down on paper, when Disney changed some of the stories and they became more popular within today's culture, it changed the message of the story. And we now need to start telling different stories, new stories, stories for a new age. And that's what I want to create. I want to create people that are happy to tell their stories. Because everybody here has a story to tell that will help another person. Your story, if you tell it, could be Sammy's ring. Because stories stick in our minds. We are 22 times more likely to remember a story than we are anything else. From that, it sits in your mind, and like a seed from a tomato plant, it grows into something that we can eat. Something that will nourish us and build us and make us stronger. So if you're not telling your story, you are denying the world your wisdom and your knowledge. I know a lot of you are probably sitting there thinking, I don't have a story, Polly. There's no story to tell. My life's been boring. I've done nothing with my life. It's just been normal. But the majority of your audience, your customers, are just normal people with normal, everyday stories. When we go to a motivational speaker, we have this wonderful motivational speech. Obviously, that's what we're there for. They tell us how they went from rags to riches. They tell us how they overcame the odds and they climbed Mount Everest, or they ran a marathon, or they became an Olympian. For some people, just getting up in the morning and cleaning their teeth is the equivalent of climbing that mountain. But they beat themselves up constantly because they haven't achieved more. And you need to help them celebrate and realise that just getting up and cleaning their teeth is like climbing a mountain, and they should be rewarded for it and supported for it. And they should congratulate themselves for it. When you come away from a motivational speaker, you are motivated. You are energised. You are going, yes, I can do this. I am going to go out and I'm going to do this, that, the other. And then the kids want their breakfast. Or you've got to go to work. Or the car breaks down. Or the husband's in a bad mood. Or the wife's in a bad mood. Or the partner's in a bad mood. Whatever. And then life just takes over and you start making excuses. Or you start finding reasons. And the motivation dwindles. Your story isn't a motivational story. It's an inspirational story. Because with an inspirational story, it stays with the person. And inspiration, for me anyway, and I hope it will for you, inspiration grows the motivation to actually get up and do it. If you feel inspired to do something, you will find a way to do it, and you will move forward, and you will take those steps that you need to take. So what is story selling? Storytelling, I've told you about storytelling a little bit. Story selling is using your story to connect with your audience. The main difference between storytelling and story selling is the details. If I was to tell you a story, I would be taking you on an emotional journey. I would be taking you to a different land. I would be full of rich, different descriptions, emotions, feelings, tastes, different characters. It would be fictional. When you're story selling, you are telling a different story. You are putting a different person as the star of that story. A lot of people don't want to talk about themselves. They don't feel like they should talk about themselves. We're brought up to be quiet, not to brag about ourselves, not to talk about ourselves. We often think that nobody wants to hear what you've got to say. I know, because I felt like that. Back in 2019, I'd been working as a multi-level marketer, and I started selling candles. And the more I told a story about the candles or the products that I was selling, the more of those products I sold. If I told the story of why I was doing it, the more people were booking parties. And that got me back thinking about my storytelling days, and when I used to get up on stage and tell stories, and I started to miss it. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed standing in front of everybody and selling those candles and talking about them and doing all of this sort of thing. And it put me back in the spotlight, where I belonged. And I loved it. But it got me started to think, I want more. I've achieved everything I actually really wanted in life. For me to be happy, when I was growing up, all I ever wanted was a house, a husband, a washing machine, and then kids. The reason for the washing machine was my mum had one of those twin tubs. Does anybody remember the twin tubs that you had to put it all in there and then haul it back out and put it into the other one? Mum had a twin tub, and I was not going to have kids with a twin tub because that was just way too much hard work, way too much. And a job that I enjoyed, and I have all of that because I work part-time as a youth worker, and the young people are so important to me. They are one of my biggest passions. One of the reasons why I want stories to be back out into the world, because they need new stories. They need modern stories that they can relate to. But I never thought my story was important. Back in 2019, we'll go back there, I was driving along the road and I was thinking, I wanted to get back into storytelling, but I don't want to do the storytelling I used to do. I want to tell my story. I want to show people that they can overcome and they can get better and they can reach their dreams. At one point in my life, I never thought I was going to get past 21. I stood on a 12th floor balcony looking down thinking, would that just hurt me more or would that end it? But I didn't, because I didn't want to cause an inconvenience for anybody else. And I'm glad I didn't, because I'm here now. I've achieved everything I've ever wanted in my life. I'm getting further and further forward with my own story. It hasn't stopped. It's not a full stop. So when you are telling your story, you can stop somebody from making that full stop and turn it into a semicolon. That's the right word, isn't it? I'm dreadful at grammar. So when you're telling your story, the more I told my story and the more I told people about my journey through depression and anxiety and my journey through life, the more people that opened up to me and said that they had the same thing, that they experienced something similar, and they were grateful to me for sharing that story. We shared the same taste in knickers. They were grateful that they weren't the only ones. They were grateful that they could connect with somebody and feel that they were no longer alone. So each one of you has a story that will help somebody else not feel alone and not feel alone in the dark. You can be that light, that shining light. Storytelling and story selling. You don't want to go down into the deep, deep, dark, desperate. You don't want to bring up all of those emotions. You don't want to go into too much detail. That's the difference. The difference between storytelling and storytelling is in the detail. So how do you find your story and how do you build it into a story that will be good for people? I'm going to use the board. Because we've got a board. And I like to write. I don't write very well. My handwriting is horrendous and my spelling is even worse. So please bear with me. So I've developed a system. It's the STAR storytelling system that I have developed. And it's a binary star system, but we're only going to look at the first star for today. So we've got the star. When you are picking a story to tell your audience, we all have a timeline. If you write down your timeline.
I've got a darker coloured pen.
Have I got a darker coloured pen? I can try. Sorry, orange is one of my favourite colours, so that's why I automatically went for that. Can you see that? It's a star. Is that better?
Yeah.
Fabulous, sorry about that. We all have a timeline from birth to now. Throughout that timeline there will have been experiences that we've had. All you have to do is write down your timeline and jot in a few notes. Jot in a few things that you might think of that might be interesting to other people. Funny experiences, tragic times, lovely times, holidays, all these sort of things. Anything that sticks out in your mind will have a story behind it. But once you've looked at that, you go into the why. This is the most important thing. I think personally, your why is the most important thing that you can have in storytelling and in business. Once you know your why do you want to tell a story? Why do you want to get out there? Why do you want to stand on stage or even just online and social media? Because when you're online and social media, you're opening yourself up for criticism. You always are. But the thing is, with criticism, you're getting attention. If you get somebody coming on and trolling you, that's a good thing. Never think of that as a bad thing. Never be scared about getting trolls from sharing your story. Because your audience, your true followers, will follow you and they will defend you. But you are getting noticed if you get a troll. I celebrated my first troll. I honestly did. When I had my accident, I went online. I went on TikTok, getting in with the kids. And I did a video. And there was, somebody was calling me grandma and old and stuff like that. And I thought, great, I've got my first troll. I'm hitting it, I'm there, I'm getting noticed. It was like, yay, it's on my Facebook. First celebration, first troll, woo! So yeah, I was really happy. But you've got to think of your why, because that will keep you going through those dark days, through those difficult days. Because my why is I don't want anybody to ever feel like I was when I was 21 and standing on that balcony. And that's why I want other people to share their stories, because somebody else will have had a similar experience or may go through a similar experience or maybe going through it. And knowing that you've overcome it and that you've got out of it and that you're in a good place now can help them realise that they can do the same. They don't have to be trying to climb Mount Everest. They might just be trying to get out of a really rough relationship. And your story can make that whole difference to them. So your why. And then we've got the when. When do you want to tell it? Is it something that you want to tell all the time? Is it something that you just want to tell on a stage? Is it something that you want to tell in small doses, in big beats? All of it, a little bit. When do you want to tell it? Where? Where are you going to tell it? Again, are you going to tell it on stage, on social media? Are you going to tell it in person to people? Is it something that you want to actually bring into communications, into conversations? My husband works as an ice cream seller, and he absolutely loves it. He's on the beach in the summer selling ice cream, talking to people. And this woman, she was amazing. She was talking to him about the weather. And she managed to bring that conversation round to her going to a conference in London. And so my husband said, what are you going for? Oh, it's a Star Trek conference. And he says, oh, are you a Star Trek fan then? No, I was in the movies. And she handed him his card. You know, so is that something you want to do with your story? Is it something that you want to be able to intrigue people with and encourage people to know about you more? Yeah? Who? Who are you going to tell the story to? Because the who will decide what details you put into the story. When you know your ideal client, you can tailor your story to that ideal client. It will also help identify what story you need to tell, because it will be one that resonates with them. You can put in the details that connect you to your ideal client and create that emotional connection. So many people buy emotionally and then they will rationalise it later. I do it all the time. I've got so many things that I've thought, this is going to be great, I'm going to do that, and then it's sort of like, I don't, because it's sort of like time. But we've all done that, and I've done it with a lot of people's courses, and it's nothing against them at all. It's all down to me, and I need to start making that time. But we all do it, don't we? We've all done it. So then that brings us to the what. What do we want to actually achieve from telling that story? Do we want to put ourselves forward as the expert in the room? Do we want to make ourselves the person that everybody associates with a specific problem? Do we want to just get a round of applause to make ourselves feel really good? Do we want to sell anything? Or do we just want to give a message to people? What's the call to action at the end of that session, that story, what you're telling, the speech, or the social media conversation that you're having, or the social media story? So those are the 5 points that I think are most important when you are picking a story that you want to actually tell. Because it doesn't have to be a deep, dark secret. In fact, it shouldn't be a deep, dark secret. You should never trauma dump on your audience. Always tell a story from the healing. Where it's healed, the scar, that's the word. From the scar, not from the wound. And never worry about any mistakes that you might make, because it's your story, and nobody knows your story like you do. We're all sat here today experiencing me stood here talking. But each and every one of you will be experiencing it slightly differently, because you are experiencing it from your perspective. Everybody else. So everybody here will tell a different story about today, even though it's exactly the same experience. So eating a trifle or drinking a cup of coffee, to everybody that will be a different experience. So when you discuss or tell a story about drinking a cup of coffee, everybody will remember it slightly differently. So when you know your who, you'll know who to contact, who to connect with your story. The next one. I'm going to use this again because I like this. This is fun. I have bought myself one of these, you know, because I just wanted one. Always wanted one. So I'm going to take that off there now. So you've got this story that you want to tell. You know the story, but how do you tell it to other people? You've lived it, you've experienced it. So how do you actually tell somebody else your story? How do you remember it all? How do you get from point A to point B? We're going to go to an old classic. Little Red Riding Hood. Does everybody know Little Red Riding Hood? Yeah? Because I made the mistake of talking about sausage rolls to an American audience, and they haven't got a clue what a sausage roll is. So it completely laid my message flat. I was trying to use metaphors. Metaphors are a great storytelling tool as well. If you feel you don't want to tell a personal story, you can tell a metaphorical story. Or you can tell a story of one of your clients that has been really, really successful. Or of a superstar, like Sylvester Stallone, because that's an amazing story. I love it. So you can build up your story, write your story down, write down everything you can think of for your story. Write down the emotions, where you were, what time it was. Write it all down, just let it flow out. Then break it down into 5 to 7 points. So there are 5 points in a story that will make the story make sense. So this is going to be some audience participation. I want you to tell me Little Red Riding Hood in 5 points or 7 points. So what's the first point of Little Red Riding Hood? Where do we start?
Little Red Riding Hood goes to the woods to visit her grandma.
So she's going to visit her grandmother. So she's going to visit Granny. Okay, and what happens when she's sent out to go and visit her granny?
She meets the wolf.
She meets the wolf, yes. And where does she meet the wolf, though? In the forest. But was she on the path?
No.
Because the path is an important part of the story.
Is this still the same point?
No, this is a different point. Because she's going out to visit her granny, which she's been told. So she's going out to visit her granny, and she's told not to stray from the path. But what does she do? She strays from the path. And then she meets the wolf. Now the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood is actually a metaphor. The wolf in Little Red Riding Hood is about predatory men. Because the Little Red Riding Hood is actually a coming-of-age story. And it was to warn young girls not to speak to strangers. It was to warn young girls not to stray from the path, to get lost, and to follow the rules. But it's changed now. We don't have that anymore. The wolf used to be used a lot in stories to represent humanity or life itself, like with the 3 little pigs or your back. Yeah. Has anybody else seen the wolf or the dog on Sammy's back? She had no idea it was there. That's brilliant. Yeah. So she meets the wolf, and then the wolf finds out about the granny, and then he runs off Granny's house. And she gets to Granny's house. She arrives at Granny's house and sees the wolf in Granny's bed. And the Granny's actually dead. Granny's inside his belly. He's eaten her. He doesn't lock her in a wardrobe like they do nowadays.
She didn't come out? I thought she came out.
Now this is the very end of the story. So the wolf gobbles her all up in one go. He doesn't lock her in a wardrobe. He doesn't stick her under the bed. He gobbles her up all in one go. And then you have what big eyes you've got, Grandma. It's the whole speech, isn't it? What big eyes you've got, Grandma. What big teeth you've got. So she's got plenty of opportunity to figure out what's going on. But it's blindness. It's it's symbolising the innocence of youth. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. Without any of these, the story will have lost something. Because she's warned at the start not to stray from the path, but she strays from the path. She does something that she's not supposed to be told. Because she strays from the path, she meets the big bad wolf. If she didn't stray from the path, she wouldn't have met the big bad wolf. The big bad wolf then finds out about Granny. He goes and eats Granny. We have the whole big lovely speech. And then he eats her.
I'm traumatized. I completely forgot the story.
So then he eats her. So that's sort of like your innocence has been... Oh yeah, he gobbles her all up in one go. You see, because they are changing points in the story, it's changing the story. And then in the original story, the wood chopper comes along, cuts the wolf open, rescues Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood, luckily, but then fills the wolf up with stones, sews him back up and throws him in the river.
I like that one.
Its face. But the story's changed. So now the traditional story, the woodcutter comes along and rescues everybody, and the wolf has no consequences. Nothing happens to the wolf, so he just carries off on his...
You said sorry.
Yeah, the wolf runs away, and
Is that the politically correct?
that's the politically correct version. Yeah.
Animal cruelty.
So you can change the story. It's like the three little pigs was... I'm diverting a little bit now, but this is one of my things at the moment. The Three Little Pigs. The Three Little Pigs was a story designed to teach people that they need to work hard, that they need to do something from their life. They need to put some effort in. Because the first little pig goes around and he just dosses around all day, sits on his PlayStation, his Xbox, whatever, throws a house up made out of straw. Now, in today's version, the big bad wolf comes along, blows it down, and he runs off to his brother's house, which is made out of sticks, because that one is a little bit more advanced, and he's actually put his Xbox down, and he's gone and put a bit of work into it and built a stick house. But the wolf comes along and still blows that down. So they both run off to their other brother's house, who's actually not even bought an Xbox. He hasn't even thought about building an Xbox. He's gone out and he's worked really, really hard. And he's built a nice big house made out of bricks. And they're all sheltering in there, and the big bad wolf can't break in. So he goes off in a huff. That's the new modern version of Three Little Pigs. The original version was the first two pigs got eaten by the big bad wolf. The big bad wolf represents life. So if you don't put the work in, you're going to get eaten by the big bad wolf. You might last a bit longer if you put a bit of effort in, but you're still going to get eaten by the big bad wolf. Life is going to take you over. But if you put in a lot of work, you're going to survive. You're even going to beat the big bad wolf, because the big bad wolf comes down the chimney and gets boiled in the pot, originally. So all of our stories, a lot of them have been sanitised for the benefit of our young people, but they're not getting the message that the story was originally made to give. This is why we need to start telling new stories. Anyway, I digressed on that one, but it's something that I'm feeling very passionate about right now, because stories are how our young people learn. So we've got a few points there. Without any of those points, the story would be lost. But I can tell that story in a few minutes, or I could tell that story in an hour, because of the details that I'm putting in. Now, if I wanted to tell that detailed story, I can change any of those details. We could have it down the beach if I'm down at Seaford. Or we could have it in Birmingham city centre. We could change the details. There's no saying it has to be in a forest, because it's a fairy tale. But with your story, it needs to be as honest as possible, because people do find out eventually if you're telling big fibbies. So I told a story recently to a group of people. Now, normally I just say I'm from Birmingham, blah, blah, blah. I've grown up in Birmingham all my life and I've moved down to Seaford. But this time, because the audience was based in Sutton Coldfield, I told them I was actually born in Sutton Coldfield, because I was born in Good Hope Hospital in Sutton Coldfield. and we connected. They cheered the fact that I'd been born in Sutton Coldfield. So knowing your audience, you can add in those details from your story that will connect you to your audience. If you're with a room full of people who love coffee, say Little Red Riding Hood, well, she had a coffee first before she went out. And it was a nice, dark, rich roast, and she smelt it, and she took her time, and she thought, oh, this is really lovely. I'm going to have to take some from my granny, and added some to the basket, and took a walk out. So then you've got that connection, because everybody who loves coffee is thinking about coffee and thinking, oh, yeah, I like a nice coffee. So you've got all of these little bits that you can add to your story that will help you connect with your audience. So it was only February this year, 9 days actually before my 50th birthday. I was sat in a room. It was quite a bare room. There was not a lot there. It was run down. There was a bit of mould over in the corner. There was a crack in the wall over there. There's a bare table with a pile of neatly folded tissues. There's a woman sat there and a woman sat there on a computer. And I'd been speaking for an hour and a half to the woman in front of me. I'd waited 3 years for this appointment, and I was sat waiting with bated breath for their decision. What were they going to say to each other? This one had been typing away. This one had been asking questions. I'd cried, I'd laughed. And I didn't know how I'd feel when I got the results, when she actually spoke the words that she spoke to me. Or whether I'd have to wait for the decision. I was sat just thinking, mind running madly in my head. They looked at each other and they nodded. And the lady opposite said to me, I can tell you that you are definitely autistic. The relief that I felt through that, I felt vindicated. I felt alive. I felt that I didn't have to fix myself anymore. I'd spent my life feeling broken, damaged, wrong, that there was something fundamentally wrong with who I was, because I couldn't do the things that other people could do. I couldn't do what a lot of people could do. Socialising with people drained me. After an hour or so, I'd need to go to bed and re-energise. I had fibromyalgia, and there were days when I could barely walk. But since getting that diagnosis, my life has changed. I've realised that it's probably not fibromyalgia. It's probably hypermobility that was causing all the problems. It was probably the fact that I was trying to be somebody I wasn't. And from that moment on, it changed my life. So I feel more confident in the skin I'm in. I've got the help that I need. But it's taken 50 years of my life. I've lived through all of my life up till now, not knowing who I was. But getting that autism diagnosis told me that I was not broken, that I was 100% who I am supposed to be. I shouldn't be trying to be somebody else, which has helped me massively move forward in my business and in what I'm doing. Sammy has been an amazing mentor and coach, and I thank her from the bottom of my heart, because she has really, really supported me all the way through. But the point is, it's never too late to find out more about yourself. It's never too late to move forward and to get yourself to a point where you feel completely comfortable. And telling your story can help you achieve that, because you will meet other people along the way who actually feel the same, that are worrying about the same things that you are worrying about. There will be people in this room that wonder whether they have a neurodiversity, whether they should get that checked out, whether they should know it. I couldn't self-diagnose because of my autism, because that was like, I can't self-diagnose because I've got to follow the rules. It's got to be this, that and the other. And this is why I like the rules of storytelling, because you break it down, you build it up, and you fit it to your audience. So I'm going to leave you with this one thing today. There is an ancient, traditional Native American Indian saying, "They who control the stories control the world."